Dense by design, walkable, diverse, and urban, Ontario's capital city is fast becoming a condo city. But from falling glass to noisy neighbors, the reality of condo life is a bit more complicated than the sophisticated style promised by the developers of these new towers. What is a prospective condo buyer to think? Here to share their expertise, Jennifer Keesmaat, Chief Planner, City of Toronto; Chris Wine, President of the development company Great Gulf; Paul DiBerardis, Director, Innovation, Residential Construction Council of Ontario; and Audrey Loeb, real estate lawyer with Miller Thompson LLP. And it's good to have all of you around our table here at TVO tonight. Thanks for coming in. Let's share some facts just to set up our conversation before we begin. Sheldon, thank you for bringing these up. According to the Association of Condominium Managers of Ontario, as of 2014, there were more than 1.3 million condominium residents in Ontario. More than 10% of Ontario's population lived in the approximately 600,000 residential condo units. From the years 2011 to 2015, more than 300,000 residential units were proposed in the City of Toronto. In the same time period, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation recorded more than 85,000 residential units completed in Toronto. 83% of these units were condo apartments, an all-time high in Toronto's development history. In the GTA outside of Toronto, condominium apartments comprise only 21% of units completed in the last 5 years. And according to the just released figures by the Toronto Real Estate Board, the average condo apartment selling price in the GTA for the fourth quarter of last year was up by 14.5% to more than $437,000. Okay, lots to catch up on here. Paul, I want to start with you. I want to start with what happened 6 years ago in Toronto. Big story back then. 13 panes of glass fell from construction sites of a condominium unit that was being built downtown between December 2010 and August 2011, which was pretty scary, as I recall, back in the day. You studied this.
Yes.
How and why did this happen?
There's a number of factors that can relate to some of these breakage incidents that were happening. Some of them relate to the actual materials used in the installation of these cladding systems, while as others relate to the actual installation practices utilized for these guardrail or cladding systems.
Cutting corners, how much of an explanation was that?
I don't think it was so much cutting corners. I believe it was more that the industry is evolving, the use of glass is becoming more prevalent, and there was still a learning curve to almost master the use and installation of some of these glass cladding and balcony guardrail systems.
Chris, it did keep happening. By 2012, about 30 panes of glass fell to the ground, and I wonder how you think this affected the reputation of condo developers province-wide.
Well, I think it's a challenge, Steve. I think what's happening, and you said it best, that this is, we're going through an unprecedented amount of development right now. There's enormous amounts of construction happening in this city. Trades are pushed to their very limits as far as manpower and so on. And I think we're still in very much a learning curve. So I think the development industry, working with the Ontario Building Code and with manufacturers, is working to get better and better and better. But I do think, we are seeing incidences of challenges with condos going down. We're seeing builders using better techniques. We're also learning things like, do we really need balconies 50, 60, 70 stories up in the air?
What's the answer to that?
I would say no. I think that if you look to mature condo markets, like you look at New York City, where people have been living in condos in Manhattan for 50 years versus Toronto.
Here.
Exactly. You start to look at and see that the buyers have different perspectives on how to live, what's important in a condo, and so on. So, I think we have a very robust condominium market, but I do think we are still very much early in our stage of maturity. And
you started as a brand guy out west, right? So you know about the importance of brands.
Absolutely, yes.
What's the condo brand in the capital city of Ontario today?
Well, here's what's interesting is we develop all across North America. So I spend a lot of my time in the US and other cities. And the global perspective is that Toronto's doing a pretty damn good job and that there's an amazing amount of stuff happening. We have, as I said, unprecedented growth, and the amount of construction is unrivaled across North America.
Well, that we know. I saw you nodding. When he said we're doing a damn good job, I saw you nodding your head. You agree with that?
Well, absolutely. I think we are doing a damn good job. I think there's a tremendous amount more that we can do and that we need to be doing. But I also want to go back to the point that both of my colleagues here made, which is that when you're growing very quickly, one of the challenges is that you can have a bit of a skill gap. There's not a lot of time to implement new training programs and to sit back and to figure out and evaluate the work that's being undertaken. So on one side, it actually presents a risk when you're growing very, very quickly. On the other side, we have demonstrated that we are extremely adaptable in the Toronto context. And one of the reasons that you saw that 14.5% increase is precisely because of the strength of the market and the reputational strength of the city on an international scale that, quite frankly, is just creating kind of a pile-on where we're attracting more and more attention, resulting in more and more demand. And really, we have this challenge of ensuring that we can keep up on the supply side.
Let me follow up on that notion of growing pains that the city is experiencing now. And to that end, we want to play a short clip. Just watch the monitors here in the studio here. This is a 2015 documentary from CBC. Roll it, please, Sheldon.
This is my third attempt at a kitchen in 13 years. It was almost completed. There was a massive flood in my unit, destroyed my cabinetry. Well, this is my only sink, only functioning sink in this unit. So it serves as my bathroom sink, my kitchen sink, and you can see just the flood damage. There's been floods in this room as well from, I don't know, pipes above me.
While Sobolac's unit is almost certainly in the worst condition, others in the building have faced water issues too. But Sobolac's the only one suing her condo board and going public.
Audrey, I think you were in that documentary, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah. So tell us, is that an exceptional situation that we just saw here?
I think it is an exceptional situation. There are always going to be construction defects of one form or another, whether it's the quality of finishing or it's the quality of the building. Hers is really extreme.
What kinds of complaints, as a lawyer, do you tend to hear then?
Well, nobody gets what they were sold. In other words, the marketing is terrific. The arrival, not quite as good.
Those posters and those,
Yeah,
and
I'm
those sales
telling you,
booklets are
those-
gorgeous, aren't they?
Those renderings and all those plans and all those flowers and coffee are wonderful. But the reality is, as Christopher said, everybody is so busy. The complete finish and the quality of the finish is not what people thought they were going to get when they were in that sales office.
Do they understand the notion of an upskilling gap that we were referring to earlier?
Yeah, I think probably it's more problematic, excuse me, even at the higher end of the market. Because at the higher end of the market, people really feel that they're going to get things in a certain way, and there's a real measure of disappointment. Toronto has a huge investment component in its condominium corporations. They are probably not as fussy about the finishes. So there's a finishes issue in the way it's done, and there's also the requirement that purchasers move into the buildings before they're really finished. That also creates a level of discomfort and anxiety for people.
Sure. Chief Planner, I want to read some of your words back to you. We have been in a catch-22 for quite some time of being very reactive and, in fact, letting the development industry set the standard. You said that a couple of years ago. Who's setting the standards 2 years later?
Well, it's important not to take that quote out of context.
That's what we do. That's what we do in journalism.
It is what you do. It is what you do, and I'm going to call you out on it. Well, there's two different pieces here, and one is around the planning side and the built form side and where we're putting new growth, and the other, which we're talking about today, is around the quality of the development, which is regulated by the building code. And I do think that we've been back on our heels in terms of being in a situation where the industry has been driving the market. In some ways, that's a good thing because we've had an aggressive industry right at the moment where we've needed to build as much housing as possible, going again to that supply and demand challenge that we see. The demand is simply far exceeding anyone's expectations. So on the planning side, I think one of our challenges is that whereas we were bullish with respect to the kind of growth we expected to see right in the core of the city, we still underestimated. And in light of what's happening south of the border, the interest we're seeing in our city right now, I can tell you in the past 2 months has gone through the roof. So again, we've had a global event that is transforming the positioning of the City of Toronto and is even further going to significantly increase demand. So again, we're back on our heels going, wait a minute, we thought things were hot a year ago. I can tell you a year from now, It's just escalating. And so on the planning side, that's one issue. On the other side, and this does relate to the labor market, you get a fussier consumer that is going to be more sensitive to the alignment between the renderings and what they purchase when you have oversupply. When you have less supply, you have a consumer who's actually more desperate to get into their housing.
And not so fussy.
And not as fussy. I do think that there is a challenge here in terms of building up a more sophisticated buyer in the condo market that can actually read through that understands the rendering and can hold the development industry more accountable. I also think there's a regulatory role. This is something that we complain about a lot. I don't tweet out very many renderings that developers produce because often we see through them. We know that those are not an accurate representation of what that building is going to look like, and that's a problem.
Who's setting the standards in your view, Paul? 2 years after Chief Planner Keesmaat uttered that thing that had to be held into context, or whatever the expression is there. Put it in context.
Well, from my perspective, I think in light of some of the incidents that have happened, as you mentioned with falling glass and some of the complaints which have happened even with respect to water leakage incidents in condos, the building code has really evolved, and there have been new supplementary standards which have been developed to address some of these issues. So the building code is actually an ever-evolving document, and it works with industry and the pace of construction to try and keep up with different technologies and new construction methods which are coming to the marketplace.
Chris, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think also there's an overall maturity that's happening within the industry, and that happens throughout all aspects of it. So the building code, yes, is continuously being looked at and updated to ensure that buildings are better built and construction is better. The planning department is having a better understanding of exactly what these buildings are going to be like when they're finished. The construction industry, and we're a constructor, we're not just a developer. The construction industry is understanding these buildings better. We're understanding that these are truly commercial buildings that we're building. I think one of the challenges you had in this market, because again, it's a relatively immature condo market, is you had a lot of home builders that became condo builders. And a condo building that's 50 stories high is not 50 homes piled one on top of the other. It's more like a commercial office tower.
Bit of an expertise gap there. Maybe.
Well, you need to look at it as commercial construction versus residential construction. So I think that that's happened. In addition to that, the purchasers are becoming more mature. So the purchasers are now coming into next generation. And what I mean by that is not kids buying condos that their parents bought. What I mean is people are now on their third condo, fourth condo, fifth condo. So they have a better understanding of what exactly it is that they're buying and what they want to buy. And lastly, what's happening through this maturity, and I think this is partially the city and us developers working together, is we're also starting to shorten the time. I think we've come to the realization that from a marketing and sales perspective to an actually delivery perspective, and we're seeing it in housing too. We're actually now making a concerted effort, certainly in our company we are, to actually shorten that gap. A lot of the challenge you had in this marketplace is you literally had condos that were being sold 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago that are just finally now being delivered to this day. So when you have that length of time between the purchase and the actual delivery, you're sure to have changes, whether it's suppliers, building codes, etc. So things evolve, and I think we need to shorten that period.
I want to go back to something Jennifer said, because I've been practicing condominium law for a very long time, and I started with the government, and I was part of the first recommendations that were made to the government on how to improve the Condominium Act. And one of those was to have an entity that oversaw the development of condominiums, just like they have in other jurisdictions in the United States and in BC.
What kind of entity?
It's an entity that oversees how the developer sells the units to the purchasers. Somebody who looks at the condo docs and makes sure that the condo docs are going to work in the long run for the purchaser. We have an interesting situation in Ontario and in most of Canada, and that is we started condominiums in Ontario to accommodate low-income housing. Okay, not a good idea. That was the reason we first developed them back in 1967. They were simple. They were single buildings standing in the gardens, big gardens. Over the years, they have evolved enormously. The quantity of the paperwork that we get when we represent a condominium corporation is like this, and they hand that to a purchaser and say, go get it, go figure it out. And the purchaser takes a look at it and says, I'll buy it. Okay? So it doesn't matter what you give the purchasers, they can't read it. I have people don't want to do condo purchases from developers because the disclosure is so enormous, it's impossible to get through. And all the different entities that share facilities like parking garages and commercial and retail and then residential, they're all bound by these enormously complicated cost-sharing agreements that are usually overly burdensome on the condominium owners.
Paul, let me put a different issue on the table, which is one of the explanations we hear for why, okay, Jennifer said market, explosive as it is right now, maybe people aren't that fussy. They're less fussy now than they might otherwise be. But another reason is that the people who buy the units are very often not the people who live in the units. How much of a factor is that?
That may be a factor in consideration for the occupancy inspection when these homeowners are required to point out any issues which they may notice and report to the builder for them to correct these issues. So if it's not an end user, there may be less accountability on behalf of the purchaser as to highlight some of these issues which may need to be addressed by the builder. So I do think an end user would have a more careful attention to detail when looking at some of these pre-occupancy inspection considerations.
Jennifer, the suspicion is that there will be in the future even more foreign offshore buyers for Toronto's condominium market, and therefore there will be even more people who are owning these units and not living in them, and therefore the suspicion is things will be even shoddier going forward. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Well, no, there's a few things in there that need to be unpacked. And the first is that we don't have a significant portion of foreign owners today, according to CMHC. So we're not talking about Vancouver, we're talking about Toronto. We, in fact, have we have a lot of investors that are actually local investors. They're investors that actually come from Ontario and from Canada that are, and they're a significant portion of the investor market. And one of the things that we've seen in many of our buildings, Chris can maybe verify this or speak to this, is that in many instances, there's an investor who buys the unit, and within 5 years, that unit becomes owner-occupied, either by the person who purchased it, and this is something that I've heard anecdotally in the industry, or it gets sold to an owner who then occupies that building. There's another important piece to this. So I think the foreign ownership piece, let's keep that in perspective. If it does become an issue, there's no reason why that then can't be regulated, not unlike it has been in the Vancouver context, and that again would mitigate the amount of foreign ownership in our city. But that's actually not our issue. That's not something that we need to be focusing on today, and I think it's a bit of a red herring to talk about that in the Toronto context. Another really important part of this conversation is that investor units have been acting de facto as our rental market. We've gone through a significant period of time where we haven't been building purpose-built rental, and that's actually a very important component of our market. So let's not demonize investors buying units, because it's actually been a very good thing.
We need tenants.
We need units.
Places for tenants.
We need places for tenants. But there's another important trend that is emerging right now. It's really been over the past 4 or 5 years, which is a big shift. It's in part because of low interest rates. It's in part because of confidence in the city. It's in part because of demand. We are seeing a significant number of purpose-built rentals coming on the market, new buildings that are entirely rental. And what's so exciting about this is that we're finally building out new rental stock in our city after decades and decades of not building any new rental. That's the first part. The second is there's an inherent built-in incentive for the developer if they're holding onto the asset. They're not selling it off. They're not in and out. They're holding onto the asset. There's an inherent driver to actually build a better asset. Because you're going to have to maintain it over the long term.
Well, let me put that to Chris. Is it true when it comes to foreign investors that your company actually tries to restrict multiple unit sales?
We do, yes. So basically, and I wouldn't classify it as foreign investors. So we look at them as investors. We're not as concerned with where they come from. What we don't want is we don't want single owners owning multiple units in our building. We don't think that's healthy for the building.
Because?
Well, because what ends up happening is if you get someone buying a block of units, 10, 20, 30 units, they now have too much control over a building that's really designed. A condo corp's designed that each of us own a unit, and we all share, and we make decisions together, and we elect a board, and it's very democratic. If you start to have big voter blocks within a building, it can skew the way that building operates. One of the things that we did that I started 3 years ago is we actually started our own property development division, because one of the things we learned, and again, this is this idea of maturity, is that the buildings, it's not about the units themselves. It's really understanding how the building functions once it's full of people and how all these amenities and shared areas and shared services work. And you can't understand that as a constructor unless you're actually managing the building after the fact. So we believe that our buildings are very well built. We put our name behind our brand and our product. And because of that, we're willing to take control of the building, manage the building. Now, the Condo Corp can choose to dismiss us at any time.
Can we do
We've
a-
not had that happen.
Can we do a for instance
it's-
here? You got
yeah,
Young and Bloor,
absolutely.
right?
We've got Young and Bloor, so we'll manage Young and Bloor ourselves.
How many stories is that thing?
So it is approximately 78.
It's I have to say it, when I go by it, it's an amazing looking building.
Thank you.
Is it all sold out?
It is basically all sold out except for the penthouses,
Except
which
for
have
the
not been released.
What do they go for?
The penthouses we have not released yet, so I still haven't priced them yet. I haven't determined what they should go for.
They're going to
yet.
be more than $437,000.
They will be a little more than $437,000.
Would they be? I mean,
They will be millions and millions.
million
of
and a half
dollars.
or 2 million?
No,
or
they'll be
more than that.
They'll far exceed that. Yes.
What are we looking at, Audrey?
Probably 10 at least,
kidding.
minimum, depending on their size.
Yeah, we
It
basically
depends.
have 4 of them, one in each corner, and probably it'll end up being in that $6 to $8 million range per unit.
Can the person purchasing for however 7 figures it turns out to be, can they be assured that their walls are going to be thick and therefore not hearing the neighbors? Can they be assured that the sinks are going to look good? And
I want to speak to that because
Okay.
by and large, the Tarion New Home Warranty Program that was brought in many years ago really did improve the quality of construction in Ontario. So we no longer could rely on city building inspectors to keep an eye on what was going on. And so the warranty program required that every builder have, during the course of construction, engineering reports which are filed with Tarion. So the falling glass and the things that you get like that, they really are exceptional. There are always going to be defects, and fortunately most of them get fixed. What's really problematic are the after things. So not so much the construction, but the noise, the smell. So when we talk about the building code, the noises and the smells are 2 of the most significant problems that are experienced in condominium corporations because the standard of development to protect you against your neighbor's noise in the building code isn't good enough. The building code is below where it should be.
the walls are too thin.
The walls are too thin in a lot of buildings. The walls are too thin and they're too porous. So the smoke and other things, and these are the kinds of things that upset people. That and the fact that their kitchen cupboards don't fit the wall space. But those are all fixable.
Do you have
the
a sense of-
smoking and the noise? Not so easy.
do
to
you have a
fix.
sense of what percentage of the condominiums in Toronto would be substandard as you've just described the standard?
Honestly, I don't have a clue. We're seeing it more in newer buildings than we are in the older buildings, okay? The smoke filtration, however, is across the board. We actually have condos now who are trying to go completely no smoking, including inside the units, because people are so sensitive to smoke and it's so problematic. But that's a construction issue in my view.
But I think we have to be careful because you use the word substandard, Steve, and I don't think that's fair. I think that what you need to recognize is that the Ontario Building Code, like many regulations, similar to automobile emission regulations and so on, we are a regulated industry, and that's what the code does. The code sets a minimum standard. So the code is not, the developer must meet that minimum standard. We as a developer, we look to exceed those standards. So
Okay, but is the
we see
minimum standard still too substandard?
Well, I think what happens is that if you're building a quality building, you should be looking to exceed those building code standards. And if the building code needs to be improved and updated, that's something that we should certainly continue to look at. But by no means should a developer, any constructor, look to the building code as saying, well, as long as I make code, then I'm okay.
But some do
But
that.
look at
But
every
some do.
agreement.
But similarly speaking, in the automobile industry, not every car is the same. So,
No, I get you.
so
Audrey, you
so
wanted
can
to
have
Every
a better.
agreement of purchase and sale includes a provision that says that the developer doesn't warrant anything beyond the building code. And that's not good enough. You can't stick hundreds of people living together and just build building code. Building code needs to improve. You don't want the minimum standard in the building code. You want something that's going to make life when people move into condominium corporations less anxious.
So that's a provincial standard you're talking about?
Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah.
Can I get, I do want to get Paul on this as well. What percentage, you having looked at it, what percentage would you estimate the number of condominium units in this building are, okay, you don't like the word substandard, not up to,
Minimum standard.
built to minimum standard,
I
okay.
don't think there's any actual details on which buildings are built to exceed the building code and which are only in conformance to the building code. But one thing I would like to add with respect to the noise issue, that is acknowledged as a common complaint in all forms of attached or multi-unit building construction. And it's also an issue which affects the low-rise sector as well. So anything from semis and townhomes, there's also noise complaints between units. So I think it's also a lifestyle choice which residents need to become accustomed to, in the fact that you do have neighbors on either side of you, potentially above and below you. So you do have to be mindful of your neighbors with respect to the noise you may generate.
Which you would if you were the owner and occupant, which you might be less inclined to be if you were running an Airbnb there and somebody was just there for a few days?
Yes, so
fair to say?
with respect to that, the building code has acknowledged that there are, again, room for improvement with respect to noise transmission. So the next iteration of the building code is currently reviewing proposals to add new metrics to add further sound dampening protocols.
We're into the home stretch here, friends, so let's, Jennifer, let me put this on the table here. You said it's time to hit the pause button on development along Yonge Street, longest street in the country. What's the reasoning behind that?
So I didn't actually say the pause button on Yonge Street. I actually think that was the headline that the newspaper interpreted what I said. But I do think that one of the challenges that we face in certain areas of the city that we need to be digging deep into is that in some areas we are growing so quickly and we're adding so much growth beyond what we expected that we have very real infrastructure deficits. And what I'm concerned about is it's no good if you just build a building, but you don't build the community around it. So this is less about the construction of a building and more about the community and the neighborhood and the infrastructure needs, the transit, the schools, the parks, all of the components that ensure that over the long term, this is actually going to be a great place that has resilience and is sustainable.
You had it out with David Mervish over that on the 3 towers he wanted to build downtown, and you got it down to 2.
Well, absolutely. And one of the big issues there was not only was a significant issue around heritage, but was also about open space, was also about views and livability. It was about community amenity space. So we are at great risk if we think just building buildings is enough. We actually have to create the fabric of the city. And we have to make sure that we're investing in the fabric of the city and not just doing the building part. And I believe that's a risk that we can't pause the industry and we shouldn't pause the industry, but we actually have to pause and be conscious that we're weaving together all of the components that will result in creating a great city.
Chris, you want to follow up on that?
I do. I think Jennifer's actually very right in this matter, and we agree with respect to the fact that infrastructure is extremely important. And there's 2 things, because I'm going to go back slightly to another point. We talked about the idea of thicker walls and better sound and all of this stuff. Part of that is a maturity of not just the market and the building code, but also the buyer. So 25, 30 years ago, when we used to buy cars, we worried about what color it was and how fancy the leather was. Today, we think about a car as the maintenance, the 4-wheel drive, the gas efficiency. We think about all these technical things and performance things. The same thing is going to happen with condos and housing.
Great Gulf gets the last great word. I want to thank everybody for coming on the program. There's Chief Planner for the City of Toronto, Jennifer Keesmaat. And thanks as well to Paul DiBerardis, Residential Construction Council of Ontario, Audrey Loeb, the Associate Counsel for Miller Thompson LLP, and Chris Wine, President, Great Gulf. Good to have you all on TVO tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.